Now, in the past, I've been a vocal opponent of the specialist system in Battlefield 2042. I kind of explained in a previous video that they were either going to be super overpowered or super useless, and if they were either of the two, it would affect gameplay, and ultimately we should have just gone back to classes. And Battlefield has just revealed the rest of the specialists, and there's a lot in here to unpack that seems to facilitate more of the idea that specialists could be a bad thing for 2042, and something that does need looking into. And before we begin, no, this isn't some mad attack on 2042 or, just reactionary hoo-ha. There are some logical reasons behind this and why I think that this needs another look into, and why ultimately I don't think specialists should exist in the multiplayer segment of the game, but maybe do have a space in Hazard Zone. We're going to take a quick look at the individual abilities of the specialists that have been shown off, and then I'm going to kind of talk about the overarching problems that exist with a lot of the specialists we've seen and abilities that they have that just frankly don't make sense or overcomplicate things in 2042 to the extent where it doesn't make sense for them to be in the game. So the first one is Navin, and this guy actually seemed like a relatively okay specialist, but his first ability is a bit ridiculous, to be honest with you. He's able to hack the body of a dead player in order to reveal the positions of players around them, and it's a red outline that goes through walls, that goes through cover, and you can see those players very clearly. Now, we don't have any understanding of the range of this ability, how long it lasts, but it's definitely something that could be the cause for frustration. Again, if you've been spotted by somebody like Navin and you don't know, or there's no visual information to tell you that you've been marked, then how do you know to expect anything? It's entirely unreasonable to expect people to just, be aware that their teammate might die and get hacked into, and I just don't think that that's reasonable. I think, again, you're shifting a burden onto enemy players that doesn't need to be there, and without visual information of them being outlined or spotted, or them understanding what's going on, it's going to become an inherently frustrating situation when you're getting killed, when you think you're in a good position, you think you're in good cover, and really somebody already knows exactly where you are and are going to deal with you. The second ability, however, really cool. I like this idea. If specialists are going to continue to exist, it's abilities like this one, which don't necessarily have a detrimental effect on gameplay, but are kind of interesting and can create cool moments. Next up is Espinoza, who has the ballistic shield, and we really need to talk about this one because it kind of highlights a lot of the issues that exist with these specialists and the abilities that they have. And in fact, the first clip in the gameplay pretty much highlights everything that I think is wrong with some of these abilities and perks that these players have, where he eats a grenade and only takes 50 damage rather than the full 100 damage from a grenade. Now, again, if you're the enemy player who's just thrown that grenade into a crowd of 3 and is expecting a triple kill, you're not going to get one. And there's probably not going to be any visual information on screen that, you hit an Espinoza specifically and he survived the grenade blast. That's not going to happen. So, you see this guy in front of you, you've lobbed a grenade at him, you're expecting him to die, so you're not really paying attention to him anymore, and he just survives instantly. And that's a big problem, because again, there's no visual information that will tell you that has happened, and even if there is, suddenly we're going into another problem, which I will talk about further on in this video, where there's visual information for Espinoza, there's visual information for Navin, there'll be visual information for Jisoo, and suddenly my entire HUD looks like a complete mess. But just that first ability right there, cool, blast resistance, maybe if he had sort of 20-10 health, that would be okay, but even in this instance here, there's going to be no way to tell that you've hit this specific operator or specialist. It's going to be inherently frustrating because you think you've got a kill, but you don't, and if you decide to stop focusing on that player because you're fairly certain he's going to die from a grenade, then you've kind of ruined yourself, even without necessarily doing anything wrong, because he's just going to survive with enough health that reasonably he would beat you if he got the drop on you. And I think the gameplay clip is actually even more kind of telling, because you've got these guys in a dark hallway, and the two to the left and right of him actually do die from the grenade. And, it's a dark hallway, maybe you can't exactly see the operator in front of you with the specialist skin, or maybe he's wearing some new specialist skin that you weren't aware of specifically for that character, and there's just no way to tell, and he lives, and that's it. The next one is the ballistic shield, and this is, again, kind of a cool idea, and reasonably, I actually wouldn't have an issue with this operator or specialist if the blast resistance only applied when the shield was equipped, because then you can very visually see and understand the grenade isn't going to kill that character. And seemingly in this case, you know, it's a ballistic shield, it has a glass window. Whether or not that will break like it does in Battlefield 4, we'll have to wait and see. But it deflects bullets. And again, you know, it's just like, okay, cool, you know, I guess don't shoot at the guys with ballistic shields, but also now you can't grenade them either because, you know, they have blast resistance, and if you throw a nade at them, they're going to survive. So maybe throw some sort of incendiary grenade, but, you know, if they move away from that, they're going to live. And again, you get this very complex issue where it's like, well, I can't kill this guy if he's got a shield out. I might have to try and rush him, but if he's holding an angle or a corner, it just becomes, again, a little bit complicated in places. It's not definitely the most ridiculous ability in the world, and a ballistic shield is actually quite reasonable. I just wish, you know, again, there were some more obvious counters to this, and that the blast resistance only applied with what's known as damage occlusion. And what damage occlusion is effectively when the grenade explodes, it has a blast radius, and that blast radius will be blocked by certain objects or wrap around certain objects if it's been blocked by an object. And it would be great if that only applied if you were facing the shield towards the explosive. Next up is Sundance, and Sundance's wingsuit is fantastic. These are the kinds of things that I've been waiting to see in Battlefield, and things that just make the game more interesting. Mobility and mobility options are a fun thing to have, and I think Sundance is a good example of that. But then we get to the smart explosives, and these are anti-armor, EMP, and scatter grenades. To start with, scatter grenades are already their own problem. We don't like grenade spam in Battlefield. This has been something that's been, you know, inherently obvious over many, many years of Battlefield that grenade spam is an issue. And theoretically, in the beta, it was an issue because there was no delay to the grenades being rearmed, and if you died and respawned, you came instantly back in with the maximum amount of grenades. And the same is going to happen with Sundance, who has this scatter grenade, which I imagine will maybe do less damage per explosion, but have a larger cluster radius. But the big issue is this lock-on anti-armor grenade, because it's inherently difficult to see this grenade, especially if you're a pilot who's whizzing around in the air. And you can actually see very briefly in the video, this helicopter, I would say, has about 20 to 30 health and dies instantly from one grenade. And that, again, is a concern. There probably will be no visual feedback that the grenade is locking onto you or that a grenade is inbound. There'll be no visual feedback that something's about to happen. You're just going to see a random tracer and suddenly you're going to die. And that is an issue, much like the issue of not having visual feedback for being spotted or visual feedback for a blast radius for Espinoza. Now you don't have visual feedback for these smart grenades that are randomly going to lock onto you. And again, it's just layers upon layers upon layers of visual feedback that just become more and more of an issue and make the game more unreadable. It's entirely unreadable for this little bird player. What's he supposed to do? Spot every single Sundance that's on the ground? Like, it's hard enough already as a pilot when everybody can carry an AA missile, everybody can carry a rocket launcher. Now suddenly you have to contend with an operator who a lot of people are going to use because of the wingsuit and just by default has grenades, which can seemingly completely destroy a helicopter on 20 to 30 health. Now, this is one of those abilities where it's a little bit more balanceable. Maybe they make the booster a little bit slower, or they make it, you know, very obvious that you're being locked onto as a helicopter and it's evadable. Or maybe it has a straight trajectory so that the lock-on only applies once, and if it misses that trajectory, you know, it just misses. And that's definitely an option, you know, that's something that could be reasonable. But we're just going to have to wait and see. This is one of those abilities that I'm fairly confident would be a little bit more balanced and reasonable to understand. But it's just one of those things where it's like, again, another layer of visual feedback is missing. Another layer of unreadability of what's happening in the game is being entered. Next up, we have Jisoo, and honestly, this operator I think exemplifies some of the overall issues that I have with specialists, including unreadability, including if they're just going to be either completely weak or completely overpowered, what's the point? And this is one of those instances where even the ability itself, it doesn't matter how meticulously this is handled or how meticulously this is nerfed, it's going to be annoying. And it will genuinely be annoying to the extent that people will stop playing the game if they're constantly killed by the same specialist. I can already see Jisoo becoming one of the most used specialists in the game, and in fact, probably pretty much straight away within the first week or two, you're going to see that happen. But let's talk about it. The first ability is an automatic spotting system for anybody who inflicts damage on Jisoo. This again is already a mess, and it's already a mess because it doesn't matter if this only spots for players up to 20 meters away, 50 or 100 meters away, or has no limitations at all. it is inherently an issue. We're not entirely sure if Jisoo as an operator or a specialist even will actually spot everybody for the squad mates, but it seems to be that way, and even if it doesn't, it's still an issue. You know, if you happen to spray at a group that happens to have a Jisoo in it, and you randomly have one bullet that tags them, they instantly have an outline of where you are and know exactly where you are, and it makes it 10 times easier to kill you. Visibility in 2042 is going to be something that won't necessarily be an issue, but it will determine gunfights. If somebody's in a good position, or in a good layer of cover, or a good layer of concealment, and suddenly they get turned into a bright red outline, they're effectively being punished for being in a good position. And there are so many instances of this where things could just get messy. Like, you know, what if you throw a grenade at a group and it happens to, you know, do 1 damage to Jisoo and she suddenly has a red outline of exactly where you are? You know, it's a huge issue. And again, you'll have no visual feedback as a player that you are being spotted. And even if you do, again, we get back into the issue of suddenly there's going to have to be 10 different icons or 5 different things, or, you know, suddenly I get spotted for 2 or 3 different operators, and it becomes more and more inherently obvious that you're either going to completely destroy your HUD or that the game is going to be unreadable, which is what's happening here. And the second ability, don't even get me started on this one. Now, yes, it does deplete very quickly. You know, it's very obvious from just this few seconds of gameplay. You can see that the scanner runs out of battery very quickly, and I imagine it will have a very, very long cooldown rate to try and be balanced. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, honestly, to be honest with you, if this ability lasted 5 seconds and took 20 minutes to recharge, or lasted 10 seconds and took, you know, an hour to recharge. It really doesn't matter, because if you're killed by this even once, it's going to be enough to drive anybody up the wall. The idea that this player can see you through a wall, even if it's 5 or 10 meters at max, is still such an ability that's so ridiculous and so unbalanced and so unreasonable and so, again, unreadable for a player, it just becomes kind of laughable. And like, I don't understand why they went straight to like a flat out wall hack, which is effectively what this is, when, you know, you've got games like Rainbow Six Siege with Jackal who can only see your footprints. You know, it didn't need to be this excessive. I would guess off the top of my head that this is going to have a long cooldown and a very short range of maybe 20 meters or so. But even then, you know, you've got a guy on the left there who's sitting behind a shipping container in a really good spot and is trying to obviously hold down or be a presence on the objective, and he just gets blown away because he doesn't know he's been spotted, but suddenly he's spotted. And it's just one of those issues again where this ability shouldn't exist in Battlefield. You know, and even if they do decide, you know what, they're right, this ability is ridiculous, and nerf it into oblivion to the extent that it lasts a fraction of a second and takes half an hour to recharge, then what would be the point of Jisoo? Why would you even have this operator? Again, why wouldn't you just have a basic class? Now, this last guy is also its own problem, for reasons that aren't inherently obvious to people yet, but will become an issue 100%. At the moment in 2042, if you have an armor plate, you get an extra 20% of health, which is effectively a 20% increase in time to kill. And this guy, let's presume that he is, you know, an active medic on a mode like Breakthrough, where lots of people are on the same objectives, you're going to have entire pockets and clusters of players who suddenly have armor plates, meaning that that burst of an AR that you were expecting to kill them with is going to have to be longer. And yes, there is visual feedback if somebody has armor and it doesn't apply to headshots, but there will be some moments and instances here where you're expecting to kill somebody way faster and it just doesn't happen. Let's say, for example, we're playing Breakthrough and this operator happens to revive 10 people. That's 10 people with a 20% increase in time to kill. And again, you know, don't even get me started on the fact that armor plates shouldn't really be in 2042. It's an issue that's going to become more prevalent and more obvious as time goes on, but again, that's entirely reliant on whether or not people actually really revive people, and I guess that's another question. But I guess a more conceptual question is, why would I use any other medic? If this medic can revive people and give them plates, surely that's better than any other medic we've seen so far. And his final ability allows him to rearm, switch classes, reload, all that kind of shenanigans. But he can do that all himself, and he can also carry rocket launchers and C4s and stuff. So again, you know, another instance where you can have maybe one operator who can suddenly have, you know, 10 rounds in a rocket launcher when you were expecting 3. And yes, that can be addressed with more meticulous balancing and the cooldown and that kind of thing. But that brings me very nicely to why specialists don't make any sense. You know, suddenly you've got multiple operators here where the gameplay is changing or something about the gameplay is being manipulated, there'll be no visual information, the game becomes inherently unreadable, you're going to have instances where you hit a Jisoo and you didn't realize you hit a Jisoo and suddenly you're dead because they knew exactly where you were. You're going to have instances where you threw nades at a dozer and he just shakes them off because he can. Or Navin hacks a dead body and he knows exactly where you are. Or this guy, you know, can call in a loadout drop and he's gone from having, you know, a light machine gun to an SMG and he's just pushed you square in the face. Or, you know, he had 3 rockets, now he's got 7. And even if all of these things get balanced, again, there are more issues with that. And this isn't a dig at DICE, but fundamentally they've had issues balancing weapons in previous Battlefield games, and sometimes it would take them weeks or months to even address that weapon at hand. How are they going to address 10 different specialists? And more importantly, when those specialists have variables to variables. For example, you know, let's say I hit Jisoo. Does that count if I'm using a suppressor? Does it count if I had an EMP or hit her with an EMP? You know, there are all of these variables that could add to these abilities that would try to make them more balanced. Like, say for example, if you hit a Jisoo with a suppressed weapon, they don't get marked. But that's another variable for another variable, and then you have variables upon variables, which make things even more complicated. And to be honest with you, I don't really have faith in DICE to really be able to balance that, considering, you know, some weapon patches have taken months in the past, and even if the backend allows them to do, you know, weapon changes on the fly and ability changes on the fly, it's still going to be a case of, well, if we nerf this guy too much, nobody's going to use it, right? So we can't nerf it too much. You know, we can't nerf Jisoo into oblivion because suddenly Jisoo is just entirely pointless. And that's going to be something that becomes inherently obvious. And having to balance all of these issues and difficulties is going to be very difficult, and you kind of reach a point of Occam's razor where they're multiplying entities beyond necessity with all of these abilities, and going back to a basic class system without potentially overpowered abilities, without potentially ridiculous abilities, or without some specialists who are going to be entirely useless like Falk in the grand scheme of things, is going to be an inherently obvious answer that people are going to keep asking. You know, why didn't we just do this? And I've already explained in a previous video that specialists can exist. They can absolutely exist in 2042 in a way that makes sense, but just not in their current instances. So folks, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again in another video.